World War II. 70 million soldiers fought. The youngest was just 6 years old. While most kids were learning to tie their shoes, Sergei Aleshkov was tying up Nazis. This is the unbelievable true story of the kindergartner who traded crayons for grenades and nap time for combat. A kindergartner's worst day ever. 1934, Russia. While most babies were busy drooling and crying, little Sergei Aleshkov was born in the village of Grin, blissfully unaware he'd soon be trading his rattle for a rifle. Fast forward to June 1941. Hitler, deciding Europe wasn't enough of a playground, launched Operation Barbarossa. 3 million Nazi troops stormed into the Soviet Union because apparently there's no party like a World War party. By 1942, Sergei was a strapping 6-year-old, mastering the art of chasing chickens and helping mom in the garden. Little did he know, his idyllic childhood was about to go up in flames, literally. One fine day, he was out picking berries when the sky filled with German planes. Seems the Luftwaffe thought Grin needed some redecorating. Bombs rained down, and in minutes, his world turned into a Michael Bay movie, minus the robots. As Nazi soldiers rounded up villagers, Sergei watched his mother and older brothers get shot. Talk about childhood trauma. He did what any sensible 6-year-old would do. He ran into the forest faster than you can say, worst hide-and-seek game ever. For days, he wandered alone in the wilderness, surviving on berries and raw mushrooms. At night, he curled up in hollow logs, probably wishing he'd paid more attention during Boy Scout meetings. Meanwhile, the Eastern Front was having a bad hair day. The Red Army was in full retreat, with over 3 million Soviet soldiers dead or captured. Things were looking grimmer than a grim fairy tale for the USSR. But Sergei's luck was about to change. A unit of Soviet scouts stumbled upon the dirty, starving boy. They were shocked to find a kid alone in the war zone. Clearly, they'd never been to a Walmart on Black Friday. The world's tiniest refugee, 1942, Western Russia. While the Wehrmacht steamrolled through Soviet territory, a pint-sized survivor was about to change the course of his own war. Sergei Aleshkov, our 6-year-old hero, had been wandering the wilderness for weeks. His village? Ashes. His family? Gone. His new best friend? A stick he'd named Boris. The Soviet countryside had become a deadly game of hide-and-seek. Nazi patrols combed the forests, and he played the champion hider. His size, usually a disadvantage, now kept him alive. He could squeeze into spaces adults couldn't dream of. His stomach became his worst enemy. Constant hunger pangs threatened to give away his position. He learned to eat silently, mastering the art of the noiseless nibble. Squirrels watched in envy as he outforaged them. One day, exhausted and delirious, Sergei heard voices, Russian voices. He'd stumbled upon a Soviet camp, specifically the 142nd Guards Regiment. The soldiers gaped at the filthy, twig-thin boy who'd materialized from the forest. Major Mikhail Vorobyev approached. "Where are you from, little one?" he asked. Sergei, summoning all his remaining strength, replied, "I'm from the war, sir. Same as you." The regiment faced a dilemma. Regulations said to send the boy to an orphanage, but in the chaos of war, paperwork had a funny way of disappearing. They decided to keep him. His first hot meal in weeks nearly made him cry. As the soldiers cleaned him up, they discovered a tough-as-nails kid under all that dirt. This wasn't just some lost boy. This was a survivor. The men began to see Sergei as a good luck charm. If this kid could survive alone in Nazi-occupied territory, surely their luck was about to change. They didn't know how right they were. As the little boy settled into military life, the 142nd prepared to move out. Their destination? A little-known city on the Volga River called Stalingrad. The boy who'd lost everything was about to witness history and play a surprising role in it. Boot camp for beginners and bedwetters. 1942, somewhere near the Volga River. While most kids were learning their ABCs, Sergei Aleshkov was getting a crash course in AK-47S. Welcome to the world's most unorthodox kindergarten. The 142nd Guards Regiment decided if they were keeping Sergei, they might as well make him useful. First lesson? Marching. Turns out, keeping pace is tricky when your legs are shorter than everyone else's rifle. Sergei's solution? 2 steps for every one of theirs. The result looked less like marching and more like an enthusiastic jog. Next up, camouflage training. The boy excelled here, thanks to his recent forest-dwelling experience. He could disappear faster than vodka at a Russian wedding. The soldiers joked they should parachute him behind enemy lines. The Germans would never see him coming. Firearms training was interesting. The recoil from a standard-issue rifle could send him flying backwards like a cartoon character. So, they started him on a smaller weapon, a slingshot. His accuracy was impressive. Turns out, all those days flicking berries at squirrels paid off. But it wasn't all fun and war games. Sergei had nightmares. He'd wake up crying, the horrors of his past still fresh. Major Vorobyev, who'd unofficially adopted Sergei, would comfort him. Nothing says father-son bonding like huddling in a trench at 3 a.m. The regiment's medic, Dr. Grigory Kuznetsov, took special interest in Sergei's well-being. He made sure the boy ate properly and got enough rest. "We can't have our secret weapon running on empty," he'd say with a wink. As weeks passed, the boy's presence began to change the regiment. Hardened soldiers softened around him. They taught him to read using military manuals and shared their rations. One soldier even knitted him a tiny uniform sweater. But war waits for no one, not even a 6-year-old mascot. As summer turned to fall, the 142nd received new orders. They were to reinforce the defenses of a city under siege, Stalingrad. As they packed up camp, Sergei helped in his own way, mainly by getting underfoot and asking a million questions. The soldiers didn't mind. They knew that where they were going, laughter would be in short supply. Little did they know, their pint-sized comrade was about to make history in the most brutal battle of World War II. Stalingrad was waiting, and Sergei Aleshkov was ready to prove that size doesn't always matter in war. Sergei's first battle, Operation Sandbox, September 1942, Stalingrad. The 142nd Guards Regiment arrived at a city that looked more like a smoking pile of rubble than the industrial powerhouse it once was. For Sergei, it was like walking into a nightmare. Only this time he couldn't wake up. The regiment was assigned to defend a key factory complex. Their commander, eyeing Sergei skeptically, barked, "What's our littlest comrade going to do? Bore the Germans to death with nursery rhymes?" Major Vorobyev stepped in. "He's our messenger, sir. Small target, fast runner." And just like that, he had his first official war duty. He'd carry messages between positions when radio silence was necessary. The soldiers joked it was like a deadly game of telephone. Sergei's first day on the job came sooner than expected. German forces launched a surprise attack on their sector. As bullets whizzed overhead and mortars shook the ground, he clutched his first message, eyes wide with terror. "Go, Sergei!" Vorobyev shouted. "Remember your training!" "Training? You mean the 3 weeks of playing soldier? Great!" Heart pounding, he took off. He zigzagged through the ruins, diving for cover when explosions got too close. His small size, once a disadvantage, now kept him alive. He could squeeze through gaps in rubble that would stop a grown man. Halfway to his destination, disaster struck. A German sniper spotted him. Bullets kicked up dust at Sergei's heels. In a panic, he tripped and fell into a bomb crater. The sniper, thinking he'd hit his target, turned his attention elsewhere. He lay there, trembling, certain he'd wet himself. But the message was still clutched in his hand. He had a job to do. Covered in mud and possibly other things, he delivered the message. The officer read it, eyes widening. "My God, you've saved us all, boy!" The message warned of an imminent flanking maneuver. Thanks to Sergei's delivery, they repositioned just in time to repel the attack. As night fell and the fighting lulled, word of his act spread through the regiment. Soldiers ruffled his hair, calling him a hero. Sergei, exhausted and still a bit in shock, just wanted his teddy bear. That night, as he curled up in a makeshift bunker, Major Vorobyev sat beside him. "You did well today, son," he said softly, "but war is no place for a child. Tomorrow, we'll try to evacuate you." Sergei looked up, his eyes suddenly fierce. "No," he said, "I'm a soldier now. This is my home." Vorobyev sighed. The Battle of Stalingrad had only just begun, and their littlest soldier was growing up far too fast. The Stalingrad shenanigans. October 1942. Stalingrad had become a meat grinder, chewing up soldiers and spitting out horror. But amidst the carnage, Sergei Aleshkov was about to prove that sometimes the smallest soldiers can make the biggest impact. The 142nd's position was under constant bombardment. Food was scarce, ammunition scarcer. One day, he overheard officers discussing a critical ammunition shortage. That's when his size became an unexpected asset. Sergei proposed a daring plan. He could crawl through the narrow rubble passages to reach an abandoned Soviet supply depot behind enemy lines. The officers were skeptical, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Under the cover of the night, he set out. Armed with only a small pistol and a bag, he navigated the urban wasteland. He dodged German patrols, slipping past like a ghost. One close call had him hiding in a bombed-out bathtub as Nazi boots marched by inches away. Reaching the depot, Sergei found a treasure trove of ammo and medical supplies. He stuffed his bag full, but realized he couldn't carry it all back. That's when he had an idea that would make MacGyver proud. Using debris and some rope, the boy fashioned a small sled. He loaded it with supplies and began the treacherous journey back. Pulling the sled through ruins, he looked like a war-torn Santa Claus. Halfway back, disaster struck. A German patrol spotted him. Bullets whizzed by as Sergei ducked for cover, his precious cargo still exposed. In a moment of quick thinking, he unloaded a box of grenades and started lobbing them wildly. The resulting explosions caused mass confusion among the Germans. In the chaos, Sergei slipped away, sled in tow. He returned to Soviet lines a hero, his makeshift sleigh delivering a Christmas miracle in October. The 142nd celebrated their pint-sized savior. His exploit boosted morale and gave them a fighting chance. It also earned him a new nickname, the Stalingrad Santa. But war has no time for celebrations. As Sergei basked in his success, the Germans were preparing their biggest push yet. The 142nd would soon face its toughest test, and their littlest soldier would be right in the thick of it. That night, as shells illuminated the sky like a macabre fireworks display, Sergei looked out over the ruined city. He was no longer just a mascot or a messenger. He was a soldier of Stalingrad, ready to defend his new home to the last. The infamous bunker incident, November 1942. Stalingrad had become a frozen hell. The Volga River was icing over, cutting off Soviet supplies. For the 142nd Guards Regiment, things were about to go from bad to worse. The Germans launched a massive assault, targeting the factory complex the 142nd defended. Sergei and Major Vorobyev found themselves trapped in a command bunker with a handful of soldiers. Outside, panzer tanks rumbled closer. Inside the bunker, tensions ran high. Food and ammo were low. The radio crackled with desperate pleas for help from other units. Major Vorobyev tried to coordinate a defense, but it was clear they were being overwhelmed. That's when Sergei noticed something the adults had missed, a small air vent, barely visible behind some crates. It was too small for a grown man, but for a scrawny 6-year-old. "I can fit through there," he announced. The soldiers looked at him like he'd grown a second head. But Vorobyev saw the determination in the boy's eyes. "It's too dangerous," Vorobyev argued. But Sergei stood his ground. "If I don't go, we all die here." With reluctance, Vorobyev agreed. They gave him a message detailing their situation and location. As he squeezed into the vent, Vorobyev whispered, "Come back alive, son." Sergei crawled through pitch-black tunnels, his heart pounding louder than the explosions outside. Rats scurried past him. At one point, the vent narrowed so much he thought he'd get stuck, but he pressed on, driven by a courage that belied his years. After what felt like hours, Sergei emerged into the ruins. He was behind German lines. Using every trick he'd learned, he navigated the battlefield. He dodged patrols, used burning tanks as cover, and at one point played dead among actual corpses as German soldiers walked by. Finally, he reached a Soviet position. The soldiers were shocked to see a filthy child emerge from the smoke. But when they read the message, they sprang into action. Thanks to Sergei's intel, a relief force broke through to the trapped 142nd. They arrived just as the Germans were about to overrun the bunker. The sight of Soviet reinforcements sent the attackers into retreat. As the dust settled, he reunited with a relieved Major Vorobyev. The hardened soldier hugged the boy tightly, not caring who saw his tears. Word of a little boy's bravery spread quickly. Even the Soviet High Command took notice. Talks of a medal began to circulate. Sergei's Medal of Valor for bravery or cuteness, December 1942. As winter tightened its icy grip on Stalingrad, something unprecedented was happening. The Soviet High Command had decided to award a medal to a 6-year-old. News of Sergei's heroics had traveled up the chain of command, leaving officers scratching their heads. The bunker incident had saved an entire company, but how do you pin a medal on a kid who can barely see over a desk? The award ceremony was a sight to behold. Sergei stood at attention, his oversized uniform making him look like a puppy wearing a circus tent. The medal they pinned on his chest was almost as big as he was. General Rodimtsev, commander of the 13th Guards Rifle Division, presented the award. As he bent down to pin the medal, he muttered, "I've given out hundreds of these, but never to someone who still believes in Santa." Sergei beamed with pride, even though he could barely pronounce the name of his medal, for battle merit. Some soldiers joked it should be renamed for battlefield babysitting. The ceremony wasn't without its hiccups. When asked to give a speech, Sergei simply said, "Can I have more chocolate now?" Turns out, they'd bribed him with sweets to stand still during the ceremony. But the mood shifted when a journalist asked Sergei why he risked his life. The boy's answer silenced the room. "Because they killed my mama, and my brothers, and everyone. So I fight." Suddenly, the absurdity of a child soldier faded. The hardened veteran saw the boy not as a mascot, but as a comrade who'd lost as much as any of them. The medal changed things for Sergei. Some officers wanted to pull him off the front lines, arguing he was too valuable for propaganda. Others insisted his good luck was needed in battle. Sergei had his own ideas. That night, he snuck into the armory and tried to requisition a rifle. The quartermaster found him struggling to lift a Mosin Nagant nearly twice his size. "What are you doing, little one?" the quartermaster asked. "I have a medal now," he replied seriously. "That means I'm a real soldier. Real soldiers have rifles." The quartermaster chuckled and handed him a wooden training rifle instead. "Practice with this first. You'll grow into the real thing soon enough." As Sergei marched off, proudly carrying his wooden gun, the quartermaster's smile faded. In the distance, artillery lit up the night sky. The Battle of Stalingrad was far from over, and its youngest soldier was growing up far too fast. The final push, Operation Naptime, January 1943. Stalingrad was a frozen wasteland of destruction, but the tide was turning. The Soviets had launched Operation Uranus, encircling the German 6th Army. Now it was time for the final push. The 142nd Guards Regiment was tasked with clearing out a heavily fortified German position. The problem? It was in a former kindergarten. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Sergei. The assault was brutal. German machine guns turned the approaching Soviet forces into Swiss cheese. That's when Sergei had an idea so crazy, it just might work. "I know that building," he told Major Vorobyev. "There's a secret tunnel the teachers used to smoke. It leads right inside." Vorobyev was skeptical, but desperate times call for desperate measures. He authorized a small team, with the little boy as the guide, to infiltrate through the tunnel. As they crawled through the cramped passage, Sergei hummed a lullaby. "What are you doing?" a soldier whispered. "Getting into character," he replied with a grin. They emerged in the kindergarten's basement. The Germans, focused on the frontal assault, never saw them coming. Sergei led the team through the building he once knew as a student. In a surreal moment, Sergei found himself in his old classroom. Crayon drawings still hung on the walls, now riddled with bullet holes. A teddy bear lay in the corner, missing an eye. The Soviet team caught the Germans completely off guard. In the chaos, Sergei's size became an advantage. He darted between legs, tripping soldiers and causing confusion. At one point, a German officer cornered Sergei. The boy's eyes darted around, landing on a familiar object. He grabbed a wooden block from a toy box and hurled it at the officer's head with surprising accuracy. The man went down, probably wondering if he'd just been defeated by a toddler. Within an hour, the kindergarten was secured. The 142nd poured in, using it as a base to push deeper into German territory. As the dust settled, Sergei stood in the playground, his old swing set now a twisted metal skeleton. A soldier approached, handing him a cup of hot tea. "You did good, kid," he said, "but let's hope your next school has less gunfire and more nap time." Sergei nodded, sipping his tea. He'd started this war as a scared little boy. Now, he felt different, older, tougher. As he watched more Soviet troops march past, he realized the end was in sight. Stalingrad would hold, and he had played his part. February 2nd, 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad was finally over. The once mighty German 6th Army had surrendered, and the Soviet flag flew over the ruins of the city. For Sergei Aleshkov, it felt like waking up from a long, terrible nightmare. As the 142nd Guards Regiment celebrated, Sergei found himself the center of attention. Soldiers hoisted him on their shoulders, parading him around like a trophy. "The littlest hero of Stalingrad," they cheered. Amidst the jubilation, a journalist approached him. "Young man, how does it feel to be the youngest soldier in the greatest victory of the war?" He thought for a moment, then replied, "I'm hungry. Is there any cake?" The littlest soldier grows up. 1945, the war was over, and Sergei Aleshkov, now 9, found himself facing his toughest challenge yet: peace. Major Vorobyev, true to his word, shipped him off to the Tula Suvorov Military School. Imagine Hogwarts, but instead of wands, they had rifles, and instead of Quidditch, they had drill practice. His first day was a riot. When asked about his previous education, he deadpanned. "I majored in survival with a minor in dodging bullets." The instructor wasn't amused, but the other kids thought it was hilarious. At Suvorov, Sergei finally got to experience normal kid stuff. Well, as normal as you can get in a military school. He had pillow fights that didn't end in actual fights, and for once, explosions were just in chemistry class, not on the battlefield. His 4 Battle Merit medal caused quite a stir. During show and tell, one kid brought in his dad's war medal. Sergei casually dropped his own on the table. "Beat that," he smirked. The teacher fainted. His unique war experience came in handy sometimes. During history class, when the teacher was droning on about Stalingrad, Sergei raised his hand. "Actually, sir, that's not quite how it happened." The poor teacher spent the rest of the year fact-checking everything against the gospel according to Sergei. As the years rolled by, Sergei grew taller, but But his reputation as the Stalingrad Kid never shrank. He graduated from Suvorov and joined the Soviet military. Turns out, old habits die hard. Sergei Aleshkov lived to the ripe old age of 54, passing away in 1990. His last words were reportedly, "Well, I outlived Hitler by quite a margin, didn't I?" Classic Sergei, always keeping score.